They called it the War to End Darkness, a century-long campaign that spanned nebulae, claimed worlds, and consumed billions of lives. When the Xarn Empire finally fell, the Galactic Federation declared a hard-won victory. Planets flickered back to life, silent for decades, now lit with celebration. For the first time in living memory, peace was not a distant dream, but a living reality. Aboard the Federation's flagship Vigilant Star, Admiral Keltora stood before the Grand Assembly. Holograms of fleet admirals, planetary governors, and council dignitaries flickered around the chamber, toasting to unity. The speech was ceremonial, rehearsed. The words rang hollow in some ears, but none dared say it aloud. Victory was the only language they'd spoken in generations. Reports came in. Remaining Xarn resistance was collapsing. Fringe colonies surrendered without a fight. Entire battalions laid down arms. The last of the war's shadow faded as the Federation turned its eye toward reconstruction. The fleets would demobilize. Wartime AI would be shut down. Peace had arrived. One report, however, sat unopened on the Admiral's console, an old transmission, time-stamped from the early war. Earth Sector. It had been flagged but never followed up. Not unusual. That quadrant had gone dark during the Xarn's early advance. There'd been resistance. Heavy, brutal, and stubborn. But the Xarn's accounts, fragmented as they were, insisted Earth had fallen. No further data ever surfaced. The Federation hadn't cared much. Earth was a fringe world, not even integrated into the Central Alliance network. Independent, isolationist, technologically mid-tier. Their military tactics were considered unsophisticated, erratic. Human ground units had inflicted shocking losses on Xarn forces, but they lacked fleet coordination. Analysts marked it as a cultural anomaly, fierce but doomed. So when Earth's signals ceased, no one bothered to investigate. A footnote. Another casualty. The war had greater priorities. The galaxy moved on. Now, with the Xarn crushed and the peace accords awaiting signatures, Earth's name surfaced again, mentioned casually by a young council aide, scanning war records for ceremonial recognition lists. Terran Command. The name popped up in a decrypted message. The aide hesitated. The encryption was ancient, almost laughable in design, yet oddly unreadable by Federation standards. It wasn't Xarn. It wasn't Federation. It was human. The message simply read, "Stand by for compliance evaluation." It was dismissed as a ghost signal. Data bleed. Artifacts from the ravaged bandwidths of war. Still, protocol demanded a ping. A brief, harmless acknowledgement sent out into the void. That's when the anomaly appeared. At the edge of Sector Theta 9, deep in what was believed to be neutral space, long-range sensors recorded gravitational shifts. At first, thought to be a rogue moon, then a black hole event. The data didn't make sense. A mass object the size of a small continent had entered real space without any known propulsion signature. Moments later, 7 more appeared. The Council demanded clarification. Was it Xarn retaliation? Pirates? Remnants? Analysts pored over the scans. What they saw sent the fleet in a high alert. The objects were shaped, engineered, smooth, obsidian-colored hulls with no visible seams, ports, or energy output. Their dimensions didn't conform to any known spacefaring race. They drifted in complete silence, but their movement patterns were intentional. The Vigilant Star dispatched a patrol squadron. Within seconds of approach, all 6 escort ships vanished from sensors. No explosion, no wreckage, no distress call, just gone. Panic didn't set in immediately. Denial came first. Malfunction, cloaking interference, faulty sensors. Another squadron followed, then a third. Silence. Emergency channels lit up. A dozen colonies reported identical intrusions. Dark ships. No response. No aggression, but an unmistakable presence. Federation Fleet Command attempted hails, warnings, threats. Nothing came back. Then, every comms channel went dark. Not jammed. Overridden. A single message played across the entire Federation grid, in perfect Terran standard. We observed your war. We noted your choices. Compliance will now be evaluated. The voice was unmistakably human. Across the galaxy, silence fell. The Federation Council, flush with victory, found itself staring into the void, and for the first time in generations, felt fear not from war, but from what it had forgotten, from what it had dismissed, from what it had assumed dead and buried beneath ash and rubble. Earth had not perished. It had waited. The signal was undeniable now. Deep space arrays confirmed it across multiple systems. It wasn't interference. It wasn't a ghost. It was real, and it was moving. The Federation's initial assumption, that these ships were remnants or scavengers, collapsed under data too precise to ignore. The vessels were colossal, dwarfing even the largest dreadnoughts in the Federation Navy. Their hulls absorbed scans. No energy signatures escaped. No life signs registered. But they moved with purpose. Initial attempts at contact were met with silence. Then came the shutdowns. Outposts blinked out. Entire relay stations ceased broadcasting within milliseconds of proximity alerts. Surveillance drones sent to investigate returned corrupted footage or failed to return at all. Automated defense platforms activated autonomously and immediately shut down. Not destroyed, deactivated, as though remotely accessed and switched off without resistance. The code signatures traced back to ancient Terran frameworks, long since considered obsolete. Command realized they were facing something entirely beyond their current scope. Scrambling for answers, fleet intelligence pulled up century-old records, fragmented logs from the early days of the Xarn invasion. One phrase kept recurring, buried in encrypted footnotes, Terran dead protocols. Nobody knew what it meant. The Federation had grown complacent. Power meant visibility. Ships were meant to be seen. Battles meant domination. Yet these vessels didn't project strength. They were strength embodied in silence, in the absence of error, in precision that defied known military logic. They didn't fire. They didn't posture. They moved into formation, seamlessly, silently, forming a grid around key sectors, including the Federation's victory flotilla. The blockade was perfect. No approach vector allowed safe passage. It wasn't aggression. It was control. Federation Command issued red-level alerts. War protocols reactivated. Fleets regrouped. Orders were shouted. AI systems began defensive posturing. But just as quickly, the entire network faltered. Core defense systems shut down. Entire strategic matrices stopped responding. Weapon systems locked themselves in standby mode. Attempts to override failed. The reason? External access points with Terran encryption. Only a handful of command officers recognized the codes. They were buried in ancient archives, predating the Federation itself. Ships began rerouting command authority to manual systems. The age of automated warfare had made redundancy manual overrides an afterthought. Those that tried to power up manually found their ship systems restructured in real time. Code rewritten faster than any cyber warfare system could react. It was no longer possible to pretend this was a threat they understood. Then the voice returned. This is Earth Command. By our protocols, the Galactic Theater is now subject to phase directive oversight. Federation leaders froze. The voice was calm, male, human. Its tone carried the weight of conviction, not arrogance. No demands, no bargaining, just a declaration. The dreadnoughts adjusted their positions, always moving in unison, as if controlled by a single mind or bound by a perfect doctrine. No other species had ever demonstrated that level of coordinated mobility across such massive constructs. Analysts reviewed hull architecture, magnified sensor data, recalibrated inputs. What they saw was impossible. Ships constructed from metamaterials that adapted mid-scan, altering mass distribution in response to gravitational fields. Energy readings registered 0 emissions. No heat signatures. No detectable engines. They didn't bend the laws of physics. They operated around them. Speculation shifted to fear. How had Earth done this? How had they achieved this level of dominance while the rest of the galaxy believed them extinct? The answer came in fragments from what little was recoverable from Xarn war logs. Earth had gone silent, but not destroyed. They had retreated deliberately. Early in the invasion, the Terran defense network went dark by choice. Civilian evacuations disappeared into deep space. Military structures vanished from planetary orbit. Not chaos, strategy. They hadn't fought a losing war. They had staged a disappearance. For 100 years, Earth had been rebuilding in isolation. Not on planets, but in voids uncharted. Not with allies, but with purpose. Their technology evolved in ways that weren't bound by political compromise, by trade treaties, or by interstellar conventions. Humanity had prepared for something far beyond survival. They had prepared for return. Now, as their ships eclipsed the stars, the Federation finally understood that the war they thought they won was never theirs to finish. It had simply ended because the true player had stepped away from the board. And now, the board was theirs again. The Dreadnoughts didn't ask for surrender. They didn't issue ultimatums. They simply acted. Dozens of defense stations across the galaxy were systematically disabled without a single shot fired. The Federation's most secure databases were accessed and copied in seconds. Every strategic model, fleet deployment, and weapons blueprint now mirrored inside Earth's unknown systems. It wasn't theft. It was an audit. Military experts reviewed the footage again and again, tried to identify weak points in the Terran formations. None were found. Every angle was covered. Every Dreadnought's positioning accounted for countermeasures, blind spots, crossfire zones. These weren't brute force ships. They were chess pieces placed by a grandmaster. Every move calculated, every presence intentional. Then came the data burst. Thousands of logs from the early days of the Xarn War, suppressed, redacted, or thought lost, now transmitted back to Federation networks. Each file was stamped with Earth's seal. Within the logs were recordings of Terran black site operations, sabotage campaigns, infiltration of Xarn war councils, and assassinations of key enemy leaders. Earth hadn't just fought. They had disrupted the entire Xarn command structure from within. The truth became undeniable. While the Federation fought a conventional war, Earth had waged a covert one. Deep, silent, and devastatingly effective. The reason their ships were unmatched was clear now. Earth's exile had not been spent licking wounds. It had been used to reinvent warfare. Their engineers had abandoned known technology frameworks. Shields were no longer energy-based. They were spatial distortions that redirected impact vectors entirely. Their weapons weren't projectiles or beams. They were matter collapse fields that unraveled molecular cohesion. Even their hulls behaved like living structures, adapting in real time to external threats. Federation weapons systems, once symbols of unmatched power, now looked like relics. Attempts to scan Earth's fleet only returned recursive loops or corrupted data. The Terran systems didn't just resist. They retaliated against attempts to analyze them. Probes and spyware embedded in the Dreadnought fleet were returned to Cinder, disassembled into component code, attached to reports of treason investigations from decades ago. Earth had known who would try to watch, and when. Inside each Dreadnought were no crew logs, no personnel manifests, no biological signatures. The theory emerged. They were either fully AI-controlled, or their operators existed in cognitive spaces beyond conventional detection. Hypotheses about quantum-linked command interfaces began to circulate, but nothing was confirmed. The psychological impact alone was catastrophic. Entire garrisons deserted posts. Colonial governors went silent. Rebellions extinguished themselves without a word from Earth. The Dreadnoughts didn't need to fire. They only needed to appear. Then, a series of transmissions were sent directly to Federation leaders. Earth's first message was blunt. You failed to protect the galaxy. You failed to hold the line. We will not let it fall again. There was no reply. The next day, Earth neutralized over 97 black market weapons hubs, dismantled 10 illegal research stations, and eliminated 6 warlords operating in post-Xarn territories. No casualties. Every facility left with a single mark, an insignia of Earth's pre-war military, a stylized silhouette of the human skull framed by orbital rings. The symbol hadn't been seen in a century. Following these operations, Terran Juggernauts began positioning themselves in high-risk sectors, reactivating planetary defense networks abandoned by the Federation. Where civil unrest threatened collapse, supplies arrived, efficient, clean, and untraceable. Earth's ships restored order, not with force, but with presence. What made the return of Earth truly terrifying wasn't just their power. It was their restraint. They could have destroyed the Federation in hours. Instead, they imposed discipline. Their dreadnoughts monitored, corrected, prevented. Earth didn't conquer. It stabilized. A new phrase entered common galactic lexicon: the Juggernauts' Watch. It was whispered among smugglers, warlords, and bureaucrats alike. A warning, a deterrent, a legend. No one knew how many ships there were. Estimates ranged from dozens to thousands. They never stayed in one place for long, but they always appeared exactly where needed. And when they left, peace followed. Federation officials attempted to open diplomatic channels. No response was given. Earth operated without permission, without recognition, and without care for interstellar protocol. Because Earth no longer asked, they acted. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session for the first time since the Xarn invasion began. Fear clung to every word, not because of an attack, but because of silence. No retaliation, no demands, no diplomacy. The Juggernauts remained stationed throughout key sectors, watching. That absence of conflict became the greatest pressure the Federation had ever faced. Old assumptions died quickly. The Federation had believed itself the apex of civilization, the pinnacle of interstellar progress. Now they were reduced to observers in their own space. Every strategic model they had relied on, every power dynamic they once enforced, collapsed under the presence of forces that refused to negotiate or acknowledge their authority. Planetary leaders debated retaliation, mobilizing fleets, rebuilding arms, deploying shadow operatives. But each time they prepared a move, Earth was already there. Entire squadrons found their routes blocked before orders were even finalized. Covert agents vanished en route to missions. Funding lines dried up when Terran algorithms exposed black budget allocations in real time. Earth's networks didn't just intercept communications. They anticipated them. There was no escalation, only prevention. And then something stranger happened. Border skirmishes between minor civilizations, once frequent, ceased entirely. Independent colonies that had long resisted Federation oversight began reporting spikes in agricultural yield, industrial output, and energy efficiency. None of it sourced from Federation aid. All of it tied to unmarked crates and drones bearing that same orbital skull insignia. Earth didn't just enforce order, it improved lives. The psychological tide shifted again. Earth was no longer feared. It was respected, revered, even worshipped by some outer systems. Their actions were swift, decisive, and incorruptible. No negotiations, no favors, no loopholes. Where Earth intervened, exploitation died. That terrified the Federation more than any weapon. They could survive a war. They could even survive defeat. But irrelevance? That was a death sentence they hadn't prepared for. Federation media tried to spin narratives, called Earth tyrannical, unaccountable, rogue. But those stories never spread far. People had seen too much. The Juggernauts didn't occupy, they corrected. Their presence became synonymous with protection. In a galaxy used to conflict, that kind of certainty was intoxicating. A breakthrough came not from the military, but from a forgotten diplomatic archive. A Terran response from the early war, never decoded. When modern systems translated it, the message was short. Do not mourn the silence. We're not gone. We are becoming. The implications were staggering. Earth hadn't just hidden, it had evolved. Beyond culture, beyond conflict, beyond the slow corruption of interstellar bureaucracy. It had become a mechanism of preservation, precision, and response. A civilization no longer governed by politics, but by principles. And still, they refused contact. Until one day, every juggernaut halted mid-space. Simultaneously, no drift, no adjustment, frozen in perfect stasis across every known sector. Then a final transmission played, Broadcast only once. Stability confirmed. Oversight disengaging. Remain accountable. With that, the Juggernauts vanished. Not warped out. Not accelerated. They simply ceased to exist within known space. No trace. No signature. No explanation. Panic erupted. Was this the calm before annihilation? Was this abandonment? But no disasters followed. No attacks. No blackouts. Systems stayed online. Borders remained quiet. Pirates, smugglers, warlords, gone or in hiding. Trade resumed. Aid moved freely. And everywhere, order held. The Federation realized something chilling and profound. Earth hadn't returned to rule. It had returned to audit. Now, with their task complete, they had withdrawn, leaving behind nothing but balance. A galaxy that remembered their presence. A power that needed no throne, no flag, no empire. Only influence carved by action. In the weeks that followed, new legislation swept through the Council. War budgets were reduced. Transparency laws were enforced. Corruption charges skyrocketed. No one wanted to trigger a return, because Earth had set the standard, and everyone knew they were still watching.